Hi, I'm Lisa Hayden with Channel 6 Central Kentucky TV, community focus on Washington County. And today we're happy to have with us Lynn Benedict, who is with Carrie and Son Funeral Home. Did I say that correctly?
You sure did, thank you.
You would be a director there?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And and that, I know that seems like a morbid subject for most people, but you know, Lynn, I've been thinking about, as I am aging, about what do people do about funeral arrangements and all. So I thought that was a good topic today. And so I wanted to ask you some questions about that. And just really, how does that work?
Well, more aging population, I think we see people that want to prearrange funerals sometime in order to maybe take some things off their children that they don't, decisions they wouldn't have to make sure that's what their mother or father would want to do. The other thing, I think it kind of simplifies things. It certainly doesn't speed the process up in any means, but it does make things simpler when the time does come, that they don't, they can take their time maybe getting in if they live out of town or something to make any quick trip to get to Springfield. And oftentimes when somebody has a prearranged funeral, we can talk to them sometime even over the phone and finalize some arrangements as well, other than go over things maybe that their mother or father or a family member has told us their wishes, and we actually, of course, would have that written down in the form of a contract. And so oftentimes people come in and they'll, several different ways of doing that. Some people set aside money and say, well, when the time comes, the finances will be here, and they'll be in a trust account. It's not payable to the funeral home. It goes into a trust account to protect the person, and it's an interest-bearing account. And that would be there available for them to apply toward funeral expenses. Some people come in and say, I want to select everything and tell you everything I want done. That way it will make it a little simpler with the decisions. You know, they select the casket they want, or the type of vault they might want, or other decisions as far as where there may be a cemetery there where they'd be buried. Maybe even want to talk to you about buying a monument, and where they would, what part of the lot, if they own several graves, that they want to be used, and maybe the balance of the cemetery lot, who would be able to use that in their family. And it just makes things somewhat simpler for those that are left behind, the survivors, at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Not everybody prepays when they make arrangements, but a lot of them do. I will tell you that. And some people set aside, will say, well, I have life insurance policies, and they'll give us maybe the numbers of the policies, or sometimes we make copies of those, sometimes we're made beneficiary of those, and sometimes we're not. It just depends what everybody really is different. I mean, everybody's situation. Some people have maybe they're going to a nursing home and they need to try to protect some assets they might have, and so due to the Medicaid laws and things of that order, well, they need to go ahead and get their funeral arrangements prepaid and a monument purchased and things like that.
Okay, well, that's good to know, so that they can go, you know, go ahead and prepay all that stuff, and that way it's done.
Right, and it's set aside in what's called an irrevocable account. And what that means is that money is set aside for that one purpose, for a burial, or for their wishes, however that's going to be, cremation or burial, either one.
Well, I would think that would make things a lot easier, having been through some of this before. You know, you don't always know what that person may want. And wouldn't it be nice and simple if you know, it was all taken care of, and your children or your spouse or whomever did not have to worry with all of that?
It does make it a lot simpler. Honestly, it really does. And people say, well, maybe I wouldn't have done that, but I'm glad my mother selected this, or I'm glad she decided that she wanted this away. things have changed over the time. You know, I've been there at the funeral home 38 years, and actually as a funeral home of the family there at Carrington, been serving the families here of Washington County since 1911, and a lot of things have changed over that time. But we see a lot of people that maybe just want a same-day service today, or that they might want to choose some other type of option, such as cremation or whatever. And when people do that beforehand, it really simplifies things if there are multiple children or other people that have to be involved in those type of decisions, especially if they're not local.
Yeah, yeah. And have to come in and then go to the funeral home and then all try to agree on the same thing. I can see where that might get pretty tough.
Yeah.
So, and then things have changed. I think back to when, my mother passed away, or just in the, funerals used to last for 3 days.
Sure.
And I'm glad I think those days are over as far as I can tell, Lynn.
Yeah. When used to, everybody pretty much had 2 nights of visitation, funeral the 3rd day.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember when we had one like that anymore.
Yeah.
Most visitations are 4 or 5 hours visitation the day before and funeral the next day. However, more and more all the time, we have same funeral and visitation all on the same day, oftentimes, sometimes too. So things, just a preference of what a family likes and what they want.
Well, I think it is hard on the family, the 3-day thing. But on the other hand, a lot of people don't even know that the person has passed away, until the funeral's over.
Social media has helped a whole lot with that.
Thank goodness. Yeah.
Actually, sometimes somebody passes away. I've seen it actually on Facebook, maybe before we ever get back to the funeral home with the person, so it can be pretty quickly.
Word spreads pretty fast.
Much faster than a party line on the telephone like it used to be, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about how, because if you go to a funeral home, say, and you decide that you want to make your own funeral arrangements, because some people don't like talking about those things.
That's right.
And, maybe they don't even want to share it with their loved ones because, it's a very intimate subject. And besides that, maybe your children don't agree, or your spouse, with what it is you want done. So I was curious about that. So if you came to the funeral home and you made your own arrangements, is that binding?
If a person signs a contract and names a declarant, that's a person that would oversee your wishes. And according to the Attorney General's office today, that is binding.
Okay.
Completely. That you name a declarant, kind of like you would name somebody an administrator, executor of a will, that you want to see your estate, how that's handled. Well, actually, with your funeral arrangements, you can name a declarant. It could be your spouse, or it could be a child, or whoever you knew that you could trust to see that would be carried out that way that you wanted. And in that contract, it states where you selected burial or cremation or whatever that case is. And like place the burial and different things, you can add just as much into this contract as you want it to be, or it can be as simple as you want it to be. But that person at that point, that declarant that you name, is actually the person in charge of your funeral arrangements. Now, oftentimes people don't go that far to do that. They say, well, I know my children or somebody will take care of that. But where that really comes in really well, oftentimes, if you have somebody that doesn't have much family, they have to depend on somebody outside of the family, or their family doesn't get along with each other and they're kind of distant, and so it allows somebody that they know they can trust to do things the way they wanted. And that really is good. The other thing, if a person's going to have cremation and they choose that's really what they want, and if they sign prior to death in a prearrangement type situation, that declarant is the person in charge. So in other words, till just a few years ago in Kentucky, if there were a parent wanted to have cremation and there were 10 children, all 10 children had to agree, regardless of where they were. We had to get in touch with them and get them to sign the affidavit for the cremation. Now it could be done by fax, but they still had to mail us the original copy. Today, only you have to have half of the children to agree. But so if there's 4, it takes 3 out of the 4 to agree. But if they sign prior to their death, then that declarant takes over, and those 4 children, or 3 of the 4, you don't have to find if they're not available.
Oh.
So it does make it simpler. And because there's some changes, like I said earlier, that have been over the years with funerals, that's one of the things that's helped, and the Attorney General's office got that passed not long ago.
Oh, okay. Well, that is quite interesting. Who would think that all the children would have to sign for you to be cremated?
It had to be till just a few years ago. They've changed that, but now, if you don't have a prearrangement signed before, name of the declarant, still half of those children have to agree.
I see. Wow.
That's when everybody, if somebody's not real happy, you try to disagree agreeably,
Yeah. Well, that's what I figured there were some complicated matters pertaining to your burial and your wishes. And, because I know that people have not necessarily gone along with what someone has indicated verbally that they wanted upon their death.
Right.
And so you think, well, golly, how can they, go against what someone has wanted? And so unless they have that.
Well, honestly, I think, we're pretty fortunate here. Most people, if they know that's what their loved one wanted, they want to try to follow through and honor their wishes. Now, it doesn't mean that they would have to, but if you had this other paperwork signed and order the way it should be, that declarant, if you're trusting him, he is the person that sees that would be done to what they was been told to do. Yeah.
So now, and there's all kinds of things, and you said you could get really specific on those things, like you can say whether or not you can even pick out your casket if you want a casket, and you can, or if you want to be cremated, then how does that work if you want to be cremated? Like, do you contact, the funeral home contacts the crematory? Is that how you say that?
Yes.
Crematory.
Yeah.
Or, how does that work?
Well, one thing lets people know there's options in cremation. We often think, most of the time, and I think a lot of people think that when somebody wishes to be cremated, maybe we'll not be able to view the body, or we won't be able to have an actual funeral service or whatever, and that's not always the truth. You can have, and some families do, choose just a direct cremation. When the time comes, we make the removal from place of death and take the body to the crematory. And there's not a viewing of the body. But oftentimes, we can do, just traditional viewing of the body. You can use a rental casket or cremation type casket, and after the funeral service, then we'll have the cremation. And then in a couple of days, we have the ashes back then for the family to make a decision if they're going to be kept or buried.
Gosh, I didn't know there was a rental casket. So that's or a cremation casket?
Yeah, their caskets are designed mainly for cremation. They're, of course, not always as expensive maybe as another type of casket, and they're one that would decompose in the cremation process, would break down better than a metal casket or something on that order.
I see. Well, that's interesting. So, and then the funeral home or would take care of that part of it, or do people sometimes contact the crematory themselves?
Majority of those places are not licensed to deal directly with a family. So you have to go through a licensed funeral home or some type of licensed society or something that could handle a cremation. But majority of crematories in Kentucky are not licensed to deal directly with the family.
I see.
There are maybe a handful of funeral homes in the state that have their own crematorium, but very few do. So as we think about, like in communities our size, you say, well, I'll just call the crematory they use directly. Most of those folks are not licensed to do that, and they can't directly deal with the public. They have to go through a licensed funeral home, and that's a state law.
Okay. Now, so Lynn, can people get so specific about funeral arrangements, as to name the pallbearers and the if they want to go to a church, or if they want a particular music?
Yeah, oftentimes we do that. Sometimes, of course, I think, for people that are healthy, when they make prearrangements, they just are doing that to kind of simplify things when the time comes. Oftentimes, maybe the pallbearers have near their age and they're not physically able, or maybe they've passed away before they have, but you have a list to go by. And we have a book that we can give people that are interested in just writing things, things at home down, just to have. If something should happen to me, I know even in my mother's, when she passed away, there were a couple of ladies, friends of hers, that we failed to contact. And I deal with this all the time, but you can just forget somebody. They don't live here. And my mother had not seen one of the ladies for 3 or 4 years, but they had been friends and traveled some together and done a lot of things. And I forgot to call her. And about a month later, that's when I first thought. And if I'd had some things written down when the time came, I could have looked through the list my mother would have wanted her contacted. And then we said, well, here are the people that need to be contacted at the time of death. If there's some friend of yours that, that maybe your children wouldn't think about. And so, and so it's kind of handy to be able to have a booklet like that to hand to the children. What attorney that you want to handle your estate can be written in there. Maybe what life insurance policies and things you might have that your children might not be aware of. What bank your lockbox is at, if you have one. There's all kinds of things that sometimes we don't think about that your children have to figure out or find later. I've seen that many times where parents, children to know maybe what a lawyer in town may have their mother or father's will. Call. So we have a book that we can give families, and they can fill that out and just keep it at home. They can tell their children it's in this drawer if you ever need it. That's where everything's listed in here that you'll need.
Well, that's good. Yeah. So someone can just come to the funeral home and get one of those books?
Sure, we hand those books out pretty often. People come in and say, I just need something to jot a few notes down about what I want. They're not maybe ready to make a prearrangement, but they know they need to get some thoughts together. And then down the road, or after they think more, later down the road, they say, I may need to go ahead and finalize some other steps about my funeral arrangements.
And if you pay for a funeral in advance, that's like tax. How does that?
It certainly would be tax deductible.
But nothing's tax deductible, is it, Lynn?
But you can when you prepay a funeral, that funeral home is not paid. You might pay that through the funeral home, but that goes into either a trust account for you, or it goes into an insurance burial policy. The funeral home has a couple of options of what they can do with the money. They can set it aside in either thing. Now, in an insurance policy, because there's no tax on insurance, you never receive a 1099 or anything on that on an annual basis. In a trust account, it'd be like a trust account in the bank, kind of like a passbook savings in a way. As that money is in that account for you, it's an interest-bearing account, so there's going to be some taxes to pay on that. You're going to get a 1099 at the end of the year if you selected the trust to set aside the money in. So it can be set aside in a trust or into an insurance policy. and a burial policy, there would be no 1099. There'd be no follow-up with that at all. And so some people like it, there's, each case you kind of have to stop and sit down and think what would be the best to do with this, and talk with the family and see which one they're satisfied, or and putting it in, where they want to put it in the trust or insurance.
Well, it's interesting that you were talking about someone being cremated, because I hear this all the time. People say, well, it just doesn't seem, final when you don't get to see the person, and if they're just cremated. Now, everybody puts pictures up in the funeral home, and I think that works myself, but there are other people who don't.
Yeah.
And so you indicated that you could have a visitation with the deceased and then afterward do the cremation.
Probably majority of the cremations that we do, and probably around, are pretty much that way. Now, we do have some that are direct cremations, but even though, Lisa, with the ones that select a direct cremation, oftentimes they still have a gathering or a visitation, whether it be at a church or be at a funeral home, for a couple of hours or 2 or 3 hours, and their children will bring pictures, as you said, maybe some mementos of things that were important for them, and there'll be flyers there. They'll have you can set up donations for some type of organization or church or whatever that you wanted to do, kind of like you would for a regular funeral, and still have a service to kind of close things out. So you can do some closure that way, as well as maybe, like I said, just having a direct cremation, not doing anything.
Yeah. And you can have it, as you indicated, at the funeral home, because some people do have services at the funeral home, don't they?
Sure.
Or you could have it at the church. Or you could have visitation at the funeral home and then go to the church as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Correct?
Sure.
Yeah.
So there's options. When you're talking about cremation, there's options in cremation. It's not always just a direct cremation and nothing done. A few people do choose that, but here in our area, most people want some type of closure, not only for their children and grandchildren or whatever and their friends, but it does help to realize that a life was lived.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can tell some stories on that person, which is always, I always think is nice. It's a good, with visitation and things, really, because in the church they consider it a celebration of life.
Sure.
And I like that attitude. And so you are celebrating this person's life, and if you can gather with family and friends, and it's kind of like a reunion.
A lot of them are reunions, because I'll tell you, a lot of families anymore, they don't see each other too much till they have something, a death or a wedding or something anymore.
Yeah.
They don't get together like they did years ago. People grew up going to their grandparents on Sundays and things, and a lot of families don't do that. People have moved away, and they find people or come back, when they have a death or a wedding or something.
Yeah. And it seems like these days I'm going to more funerals than I am weddings. So, but then you mentioned as well that, because I was thinking you could put that information in your will, but you indicated that most of the time you don't read the will until after.
Absolutely. You want to do this beforehand, because actually the funeral is over most of the time before the will's ever read.
Yeah.
And sometime, unless there's exact directions for the family to know where that will is, it might take them a few days to find the will.
Yeah.
If they don't have it in a lockbox or some place where their parents keep important documents,
Yeah.
So no, you would want, if a person's going to do pre-arrangements or do some type of funeral arrangements that they want, that needs to be all taken care of prior to, if that's what a person's desires are, That way, don't ever put it in your will because it's going to be too late.
Yeah. You could have had all your funeral arrangements in that will.
They could read it and say, we messed up.
We sure did. So, well, that's awfully good information. And then one more thing, because I do know that at the funeral home, say if you want to pick out a casket, but you don't have to use a casket from the funeral home as well, right?
That's correct. You wouldn't have to.
Because I know that in, there's the monks make caskets.
Right.
And I know of some people that have used one of theirs.
Sure.
So the funeral home allows it either way, correct?
They do. And that's true. And that's a federal law. You're welcome to bring a casket from somewhere else. There is the possibility, because it is lawful for a funeral home to discount their service if you purchase their merchandise. So that's the possibility that their funeral professional fee could be actually a little higher if you bring your own product in. And as long as it's on the level and told to you at the time, then that's okay. And providing it is documented in your general price list, then they could actually discount, say, for whatever amount, whatever their service fee is, and you purchasing their product, if they have it carried at their funeral home, then they can actually discount their service charge, and you wouldn't pay hardly as much on the service charge. But you can bring a casket from anywhere you want to, but you might have to pay a higher service charge at the funeral home. And I would say most places do have that in their general price list because protecting their overhead.
Yeah, yeah. And then also, aren't there laws in Kentucky regarding burial as far as a certain type of casket, or are there any laws on that?
Majority of that would fall under the direction of the cemetery. Some cemeteries can require the minimum of a concrete grave liner or a vault that seals. But majority of the time that is not by the state. The only time the state would ever step in and require some type of outside container over within the casket would be maybe some type of death by some type of communicable disease or something, and the health office stepped in and say because of the condition or the disease that this person had, we could require that person to be buried in a sealed vault or something. But majority of the time, all that is left up to the cemetery. And majority of cemeteries in our area do require the minimum of a concrete grave liner. And the purpose of that is for the maintenance of the cemetery. We've all been in cemeteries and saw monuments that were leaning, or maybe have actually even fell over or something, and that's because they were in either the casket was put directly into the ground, and the casket's not designed to support the weight of the ground and the earth. And so eventually over time that collapse, it will give away. And of course when it does, the grave gives away, and it goes. So if there's not some type of vault or a concrete grave liner or something used to support that, then there's always the maintenance of people in the cemeteries always having to come back in and fill that grave in over years, till that gets actually settled.
But now that is a requirement here.
Most of the cemeteries in our area require the minimum of a concrete grave liner. A concrete grave liner doesn't seal as far as protecting any water or any elements from the earth to enter it, but at least it will hold the ground up and not collapse in on the casket, and so it holds the grave level, you know what I mean? Right.
And is that required as well with a cremation?
No, okay. It wouldn't be.
Okay.
No. Some cemeteries could require that the urn be of a marbling type product or something that wouldn't decay, or some might require, if it was some type of urn, that it would be put in an urn vault, but it's so much smaller and less expensive in some things like that, But no, that would all come back to the individual cemetery.
I see. So, well, Lynn, you've answered my questions today.
Well, thank you.
I don't know if there's anything else you would like to share that I haven't asked.
Well, I think we've covered it pretty well, actually. We've touched from when a person's wishes or whether it be burial or cremation, and then the difference in prepaying or some that you don't have to prepay, that you can come in and make your arrangements, and the bill be paid out of your estate. I mean, there are different ways of doing that. So sometimes when people think, oh, I'll have to come up with this amount of money up front, you don't necessarily always have to do that. We can go get your everything taken care of, and when the time comes, it can be paid out of the estate if a person wants to do that. But then there are cases, like we said earlier, where a person might have to end up going to a nursing home or some type of facility to care for somebody, and they're wanting to protect some assets that they may have, and because a funeral is not counted against them as an asset after it's irrevocably assigned to the funeral home, then it protects that, where they can have the wishes that they want.
Oh, that's good, isn't it?
It sure is.
Yeah. Because, you know, nursing homes are expensive.
Absolutely.
And they can take all your money.
Yeah.
So that way you can set aside some money for your burial expenses and your funeral and all of that prior.
That's right.
Or even after you get into the nursing home.
A lot of people wait and see, they find out, they go in, they think they're going to be there for a short term, and end up that they realize they're not going to be able to come home, and then that the children or whoever's left behind have to make a decision for them to protect some assets that way.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah. Well, those are things that we all have to think about, because, you know, it's something that's inevitable for everyone.
Well, preparing for it won't speed it up.
No, yeah. And it really is good, I think, if you can prepare for it, you know, because it takes all the stress off of the family to have to make those arrangements. And, you know, I just think that's a good thing.
Well, we want to protect our estate. We want to have insurance on our homes, or we want to have, whatever the case might be, life insurance to pass on to our children, or whatever that might be. So we do all these other things. Why don't we take care of our own
exactly
as well?
Yeah, I agree. So great information, Lynn. I want to thank you very much for being on here today.
Well, I appreciate you asking me.
Yeah, we'll talk to you again
Thank
soon.
you. All right.